Hello and welcome to Woven Threads, an oral history project focused on capturing narratives and experiences of migration and intersectionalities within migrant women's experiences in Korea. Today's date is October 21st, 2023, and I am here with Miss Faith, the librarian at the middle and upper school at Chadwick International. Could you please state your full name for the record?
So my full names are Faith Muturi.
Thank you, Miss Faith. Today, we will be discussing various aspects of your life and experiences. The purpose of this interview is to preserve your unique perspective and contribute to a broader understanding of diversity, migration, and cultural heritage. Before we proceed, I want to assure you that your participation is entirely voluntary. At any point during the interview, if you wish to pause, skip a question, or withdraw your consent, please let me know. Your privacy and confidentiality are important to us, and we will take reasonable measures to protect your personal information. However, please note that the interview will be recorded and may be shared with the public or used in educational materials related to our project of Woven Threads. Are you comfortable proceeding with the interview?
Yes, let's go ahead.
Okay.
That's fine.
So please feel free to share your stories, memories, and perspectives openly. Remember, there are no right or wrong answers because this is your personal narrative. To start, I would like to ask you, where and when were you born?
Okay, so I was born in Kenya, which is in East Africa, in the 1960s. Do you need
Yes.
more information about that?
Yes, could you go into more detail?
What else do you need to know? So Kenya is actually among the three East African countries, the main East African countries, which consist of Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. And Kenya is towards the coast.
Mhm.
Uh, and I was born in a little town called Nyeri, but my parents migrated to Nairobi, which happens to be the capital of Kenya. And so I grew up in Nairobi, went to school in Nairobi.
Mhm.
And that was just after, I was born just after the country got independence.
Mhm.
So we were, when I was young, dealing with all the issues that come, to play when, a country has gotten independence and is trying to become uh, developed on its own without the influence of its colonizers.
Thank you for sharing that. Could you share your journey of migrating to South Korea? What were the circumstances that led to this decision, and also what was the purpose of your migration?
Okay, so South Korea, it's interesting. It has never been on my radar, to be honest. It has never been one of the countries that I thought I would end up being. And being an international teacher, as you know, you move around from country to country. So I worked quite a bit of my work was in Kenya, in the international schools in Kenya. And then I moved to West Africa to a country called Gabon. And I worked there for quite a while, about 3 years. And then from Gabon, I moved to China. And I was in China for more than 6 years. And so then around that time, I was thinking I want to be closer to home because my children now had grown up and I had grandchildren. And I was thinking it would just be really nice to be close to home where I can, fly home easily, see my grandchildren, my own children, and the rest of my family. So I moved to Sudan, which is a 2-hour flight from Kenya. And for me, that was, perfect, placing in terms of a job. Unfortunately, I don't know whether you know about the story or the history of Sudan. Sudan, at some point, was divided into two countries. It was originally the biggest country in Africa, and for political reasons and so many other reasons, it was divided into two countries. And so the school I was in was in Khartoum, which is on the north of Sudan, and beautiful school, lovely children. I thought I had landed my dream job. And we worked there for a year, and then the war broke out. So one day, on a Saturday, we woke up and there were gunshots and bombings and all kinds of things, and we had to be evacuated from Sudan. And so I went back home, and I wasn't even very sure whether it was really traumatizing. The whole journey, moving from Sudan back to my country, was a hard experience. It was, and I wasn't sure whether I really wanted to work again. But I go back home, and after a while, I thought, it might just be worth looking around. And it was also very late in the hiring cycle of international schools, so I wasn't even sure that I was going to get a job. And then the librarian in Chadwick had to leave for personal reasons, and they were looking for somebody, and that's how I ended up coming to South Korea. So that has been my migration kind of journey to Korea.
Thank you for sharing that with us. What were your expectations or hopes before moving to South Korea, if you had any?
It's funny because having worked in China for so long, this is really bad stereotyping kind of stuff, because you think that if you're working in Asia, or you're living with Asia in Asia, or Asians or people who live within a certain community or area, that they behave the same. So
Mhm,
I come to Korea, and I'm thinking, oh, they can't be very different from the Chinese.
mhm.
And I have been very surprised to find that the Koreans are very different from the Chinese, extremely different, in terms of your work ethic, the way you, um, how can I put it, the way you, your relationships with people and even among yourselves is very different. So that has been an eye opener for me. And I must admit that. Usually when I go to different countries, it takes me like 2 months or so for me to kind of get into, the rhythm of things, understand people, and
Mhm.
and it's taken me a bit longer in Korea to just understand how the Koreans think, how they perceive life, and what their goals are. And the work ethics for me is just amazing, just the way you do things. So it's been an interesting journey for me coming to Korea. So it's not what I expected, for sure. I did expect to find a beautiful country, and I had looked up Sondo. It's a new city, and so I was expecting to find a beautiful place. And I must say I like it. I like also the fact that it's quiet. It's not so busy, like the big cities out there. So for me, that has been perfect.
Thank you. Could you go more into detail on how um, the difficulties of getting used to Koreans compared to other countries?
Well, I think some of my experiences would be the kind of experiences anybody would find in any other country that they go to. You go there, with certain expectations. But for me, what I have found very interesting, and I've had now, 3 months down the line, a lot of conversations with students and teachers who are Korean, and teachers who are maybe not Korean, but maybe married to Koreans. I've had all these, conversations with these people. And one of the things that has really amazed me about the Koreans is, I can tell you, one of the things that started these conversations was, kids sleeping in the library. And I'm like, why do these kids sleep in the library? At the beginning, I just couldn't get it. I didn't understand why, the kids are so tired. And I would talk with the teachers, and I would say, I don't get it. But then in the process, I've done a lot of talking to people, talking to students, to try and understand what's going on in their lives. And some of the things that have come up have been just how hard the Korean students work, and I thought, and how competitive you all are. And I thought the Chinese were competitive, but the Koreans are on a completely different level, I've discovered. And I've learned a bit also about the history of Korea and where you've come from. and why it's so important to excel. And it's a kind of almost similar story to China, because China at some point was down there and they worked very hard to be where they are now. But the Koreans work extremely hard to be successful, to do well in school. And as a result, kids are working very late into the night, and then they come to school. And whenever they have a little free time, they need to rest and maybe take a power nap. And that's hence the reason why I have some kids sleeping in the library. So now I've gone a bit easy on that. It's been a bit of a struggle there, but I'm more understanding of where they're coming from now than when I first came in. It was an experience I had never seen before in any other school I'd worked in, where kids actually like sleep completely. Sometimes kids will doze off everyone, but here the kids kind of black out whenever they have a free moment. The kids just black out, and it's because you go to the Hogwarts. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes.
And then after that, you have to do your assessments. And then after that, maybe you have for the grade 11, 12, they're applying for their university applications. So all that put together, I mean, if I was in your shoes, I would do exactly the same thing. So, so that has led to many conversations about how Koreans perceive life, how hard they work to be where they are, and to achieve their goals. And it's been a very interesting experience for me.
Thank you for explaining that. Um, Moving on, what historic events, such as protests or performances, have you experienced in Korea so far, if any?
I'll skip that one because I haven't experienced
Okay,
any.
that's
uh,
understandable.
I I went and bought, paid for the dress. What do you call that event where we dressed with
Oh,
the
I think
what
the
is
humble.
yes, the humble. So I went and paid for it with the intention of dressing up and all that. And it just happened, unfortunately, to be one of those days where I was so busy, things just came up, and I never ended up wearing it.
Mhm,
But yeah, that is as far as my experience in terms of events and,
mhm,
stuff about Korea that I've done.
mhm. Thank you. Now we will move on to questions that are more focused on your um, background and cultural heritage. So first, how would you describe your ethnic and cultural background?
So I want to imagine 100% African, and so, my cultures are, whatever background I have in terms of culture is very African. It has, I must admit, been influenced. Some of the things that I do today have been influenced by the Western world because my education maybe has been a bit Western. So that kind of, has influenced some of the things that I do, in terms of culture. But I'm very African. I, at some point, had a DNA test done just for curiosity. My mom was very upset because she said, what are you doing this DNA test for? Are you trying to say that you might not be our kid or something like that, And she quite couldn't understand why I was doing it. But I was just very curious. And taking DNA tests in Africa is not a very normal thing unless people are going through divorce or something like that. But also I discovered that also the we don't have enough data to inform DNA tests so that we get enough information about the origins of people. So from my DNA test, it did show that I might have some traces of the Egyptian DNA in me, but I cannot, for the life of me, explain to you how or where. I went back to my parents and I said, "Where with this Egyptian?" And my mom just, she didn't want to have that conversation. But I don't think she had any information anyway about where that could have come from. Recently, I was looking, because if you look at my eyes, the reason why I did the DNA test was because some kids, I didn't even know this, some kids in one of the schools I was working in said that I have blue eyes. And I said, Africans don't have blue eyes. And but then if you look at my eyes in the light, you'll see that I actually do have blue a blue whatever in my eyes. I don't know where that came from, and I was curious. And more recently, I was doing some research, and they were saying that there are people in Africa who had blue eyes at some point, and a lot of them more had something to do with Egypt. So I was thought, oh, that's interesting, because that when I did my DNA test, then there was so maybe, but I have no information about that, and nobody in my family has any information about that. So they could have been people who migrated and came down from Egypt, but I have no idea or no information about that.
Thank you for explaining about your background. Um, Moving on, what was your family like in Kenya, and could you describe your childhood?
So my parents were educated, but they were also very Christian. Both my parents were very Christian, so we were brought up in a Christian family, going to church every Sunday, quite strict. Um, they also believed a lot in education, and for them it was important that their children get educated. Now, when I was a kid, Kenya had just gotten its independence, and some of the things that used to happen then were girls were not educated too much, so they would put you through the elementary school, and then you are almost ready to get married or something like that. So some girls dropped off um, out of school when they were pretty young. But my parents were very keen to make sure, and were three girls in my family and two boys. They were very keen to make sure that we got a good education, and my dad would, make sure we go to school and do our homework and stuff like that. Very early on in our lives, they bought a farm somewhere just within the city, and so I grew up in a farm. We reared cows and chickens and goats and things like that, in what today is considered a very nice neighborhood, but then was like a little village with a lot of people who my parents had uh, gone to school with or gone to church with as our neighbors.
Mm, What are some of your earliest memories from your childhood?
I think some of my earliest memories, I was a daddy's girl. I was very close to my dad. So I did a lot of things with my dad. And because I was the firstborn in the family. I still am the firstborn in the family.
Mhm.
And we so three girls, and then the boys came much later. And so my dad, he was a hands-on man. So whenever he wanted to put something together, build something, he would call us, the girls, to hold on to something, hold on to this piece of wood so I can hammer the nail in. And so I think in the early part of my life, grew up almost like a tomboy, because we did everything with my dad. There was a river at the bottom of our farm. Would go fishing for God knows more tadpoles than fish, I think, is what we caught. But that for me, and then of course the farm. So I learned how to milk cows. I could, do that and take care of the goats and chickens. My mom kept a lot of chickens, and she'd sell them to institutions out there. So I was just a country girl. But working with my dad was one of the, I think, first memories and fond memories that I have of my growing up.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Um, Within your family, were there traditional customs or practices that were particularly important?
Yeah, I think within our, because Kenya has 45, I think 46 now, 45 tribes, all who speak different languages. So I come from one tribe called the Kikuyu tribe, and we do things differently from other tribes. So some of the things that I know in terms of customs that we hold dear as a tribe is things like marriage is a thing that a custom that was considered important is still considered very important, and a lot of emphasis is put in. the whole marriage ceremony. So when I was growing up, and we still do that even today sometimes in some families, the boy would pay dowry to the girl's family if you are going to marry that girl. And that's a tradition that has been there since time immemorial. Now, how big the ceremony is going to be depends on the family and how much money they have and all that stuff. But that even today, when we talk about marriage, everybody gets excited because it's such a process. The whole marriage ceremony is a process. So that comes to mind very a lot in my mind right now. Other traditions. I think, like I was saying, a lot of some of our traditions have been influenced by Western culture. Just the fact that my parents were Christians meant that then the church thing, which is not going to church, is not an African thing. It's a very Western thing, but it's a for us it was a culture, it was a tradition. We had to go to church, follow the teachings of the Bible and things like that. And that is something that comes up with us. It doesn't matter how old you are, you still retain some of those, shall I call them values that you get from being uh, you know uh, uh, that religion has instilled, let me say, in you. So yeah, so stuff like that. Yeah, the dressing, of course, has been influenced by Western culture big time. My tribe never dressed the way we do now. They had their own way of dressing, but that's went out of the window straight away the day we embraced education and Western culture and stuff like that.
Thank you so much for answering that question. Connected to that question, and your answer, what role did religion play in your life while you were growing up?
Big time. Yeah, like I mentioned, it played. I mean, I remember at some point trying to change my name, drop the Faith. I wanted to drop my name Faith and just keep my traditional names, which have a lot of meaning in my language. But my parents were very upset about that. So even just the naming, the names that we carry are influenced by our religion. Weddings, we do it the Christian way. There was a traditional way of getting married. My tribe had a traditional way of getting married, but we get married in church. You wear a white wedding dress, and stuff like that. So religion has influenced a lot of my life, still does, even today, because that's the way I was brought up.
Um, Even more connected to that, how would you describe the impact of Western influence in your childhood and your life?
Big. It's quite big, and like I mentioned before, even the schools that my parents took us to. So there were different kind of schools in Kenya when I was growing up. Now things might have changed a bit, but the elementary school that I went to was a predominantly white school. My dad thought that by taking me there, I was going to get a good education. So when I was in school there, we must have been like five black kids only. The rest of the kids were all white kids, and so that has a big impact on how you do things, how you look at things, sometimes how you behave. And then, of course, it continued. Our curriculum in Kenya, because we were colonized by the British, was a British curriculum. So kids were doing something close to what we call IGCSE today. So something close to that is what we did. And then we moved on. And later on, I some of my certification is from Britain. So it's just Western culture has had a huge influence on you know the way we look at things and the way we do things.
That's very interesting. Connected to what you said about IGCSEs, could you describe your school experience and what subjects you studied and if you had any influential teachers?
Yeah. So after my elementary school, I went to a secondary school where I did some of my. I mean, in my secondary school, there's one influential teacher who I still remember today. She taught us literature. Maybe hence the reason why I ended up becoming a librarian, because reading and literature is a big thing for me. She was an amazing leader. I mean, teacher. Some of her teachings still resonate with me even today. Um, and then for we called it A level then because that was the British way of doing it. For my A level, what would be year 11 and 12 today in the IB system? I again took literature as one of my subjects and moved on to do literature and library science at the university. For my first university degree, I went to South Africa. So again, I moved out of my country and went to another country, which was, South Africa is more, okay, influenced a bit by the Dutch and people like that, but more English than we are. Um, History is another subject that I really liked. I feel like there was a point where I didn't have a very good teacher, and I always think teachers influence how kids appreciate certain subjects. But then I picked it up later on in my life, and I still have a very keen interest in the history of countries, what's going on. And I think for me, I've been fortunate to have a job in the international schools because then it means that I can travel and come to a country like this, learn how the history of Korea and how people behave and all that stuff that goes with it. So that for me is of great interest.
Thank you for your answer. Um, at the moment, the Zoom meeting says that there is 8 minutes left of the
Or
meeting.
is it
Yeah,
okay?
so I'm
Zoom.
thinking of like making a new meeting and pausing the
Okay,
recording and then continuing it right now before it's over.
okay, okay. You do that.
Okay, thank
Send me
you.
the link.
Just to continue where we left off, um, could you continue what you said about your influential teachers?
All right. So I had this English teacher. She was actually an English teacher from Uganda. Amazing lady. She taught us English and literature. And I still remember even today some of the things that she taught me, some of the statements she'd make um, as our teacher, and even some of the advice. I remember later on after we left school, we went to see her because she was not well, and we went to see her at her home. And it was just an amazing experience. It's those teachers who you really never forget. And if you hear that something is going on in their lives, then you want to keep tabs and be there for them. She's one of my most influential teachers. Um, I and I guess when you talk about influential, it could be positive or negative because I had a Swahili teacher, and Swahili is our native language. I mean, it's our national language in Kenya. But because I had gone to elementary school where we were taught purely in English, my Swahili was not very good. And when I went to secondary school, my Swahili teacher could never understand why I spoke such bad Swahili. And so I got into a lot of trouble with him. And I still remember him even today. So it's, it goes both ways. But yeah, my literature teacher influenced my love for reading, possibly why I ended up becoming a librarian.
Thank you for your answer. Um, moving on to a different topic, what was the food like in your household? And are there any traditional dishes or recipes that hold special meaning for you?
So the food, again, it's interesting. The food that we ate was influenced. We had some traditional dishes. So, like in my tribe, again, we have a dish called githeri, and that might be one of the dishes that is top of the list in terms of food that we eat. And it's just simple dish, which is just maize and beans. You boil it, and then maybe you stir fry it with something, and that's the end. Quick, and you're off. So we would have that, but there were a lot of other dishes that were influenced by the Western world, Western influence that we had in the country then, but also the Indians. We Kenya was the railway line was built by the Indians, and when they came to Kenya, they never left. Some of them never left, so they started businesses. Some of the biggest businesses we have in Kenya are owned by Indians, and their food has influenced a lot of the food that we eat. So, like chapati, which is an Indian food, is eaten all over in Kenya by everyone. Rice is eaten all over in Kenya by everyone, almost, if you can afford it. So there's a lot of influence from other places in the world that has kind of come up in the kind of food that we ate and still eat even today.
Are there any particular dishes that you think highlight your cultural background?
The githeri is I would say is a cultural food. There's also another food called mokimo, which is similar to githeri. It's beans, maize and beans, but then you mash it up with potatoes, and you put some green leaves in it, and then you have something what would look like mashed potatoes, but it's green, you know. So that is definitely very traditional and part of the Kikuyu cultural food that we eat.
Thank you. Um, could you go more into detail about your specific tribe that you belong to?
So the Kikuyu tribe is right now the biggest tribe in Kenya. So in terms of population, it's the biggest tribe in Kenya. They are also among other tribes. I think because they were the majority anyway, they were among the tribes that fought very hard for the independence of the country. So if you talk to like for example, my grandfather, my grandmother, they would tell stories of how they would have to hide from the colonialists when we were trying to fight for independence. And I remember my mom talking about they had these big jars, pots in the houses for water. And the parents would put them in those jars when the white people came to kill them and stuff like that. So some maybe horrifying stories then, but that's what forms our history and culture in Kenya. Um, we are also we are known to be hardworking. We work hard, and we are more business kind of people. So a lot of businesses in Kenya will belong to the Kikuyus. Um, what else about our tribe? Yeah, I think that's maybe a bit more outgoing, quite outgoing. We'll, try and explore things out there. The fact that we are the majority, I mean, I'm not the majority, but the bigger part of the, country has Kikuyus. You find us all over the place. In every single city you go to, there'll be a Kikuyu, maybe with a shop in that little city, or running some other business somewhere in that city.
Thank you for explaining more about your tribe. Um, moving on, could you describe the house that you grew up in? What was it like, and what were some of your favorite memories or spaces within it?
So my house, I can start with explaining how we came about to live in this place. So the farm I was telling you about, my parents had bought it from a white lady who was leaving the country after we got the independence. A lot of the white people left the country, went back to Britain, and my parents bought that farm from this white lady, and so we inherited the house. So the house I grew up in once upon a time belonged to a white settler in Kenya, and so it was a brick house with 3 bedrooms, and my parents slept in one bedroom. Then I had 2 brothers. My 2 brothers slept in the other bedroom, and the 3 girls, we slept in the bigger bedroom. And there was I remember when we got it, it didn't have a kitchen. They had like where the dining room was this, the same space exactly how we are building houses now. There was a little kitchenette in there, and that's where the kitchen was. So my dad extended the house and built a kitchen so that it had, a bigger space for cooking and all that stuff. Some of my favorite, it was old. It was a very old house. We actually sold it very recently. It was over, by the time we were selling it, it was over 200 years old. So it was a really old house. And by the time we were selling it, the roof was leaking. And they had used little pieces of wood that they would cut into little blocks to build the roof. So they didn't use the tiles and anything else that we're using today. They were really old, really nice, I thought. Little blocks of wood that they would put together to build the roof. But by the time we were selling it, that was falling apart, and it was impossible to repair because we could never get those kind of little pieces of wood to put back in. Some of my favorite spaces, again, my dad used to, he loved education. He loved to, he liked to buy um, secondhand stuff from expatriates who are leaving the country. And his biggest buy would be if he went in and found books, he'd buy the books, uh, sometimes together with the bookcases. So we had bookcases all over the house with books. Some of the first books that I read that I thought were really interesting were books that my dad had bought from, people who are leaving the country. And so some of my favorite spots in the house were spots where maybe there was a bookcase and I could just sit there and read a book.
Thank you so much for sharing that story with us. Um, how have you preserved and maintained your natural heritage and culture while living in South Korea? Are there any specific practices or traditions you have continued to embrace?
Here in South Korea, or sorry, I missed that bit.
So how have you preserved your own heritage and culture while living in South Korea or any any other countries?
Okay. I still listen to some of our music. I like to listen to some of our African music. I and some of it now again has been, a bit corrupted by Western influence, but I think we have wonderful music, and dancing is one of the things that we do. So, I enjoy just when I'm in the house, just listening to our music. Um, More recently, I've been again reading comes in. I've been reading a lot about African history and some of the things that have made us who we are. So that has been an interesting topic, and I was actually very pleasantly pleased to find books in our library when I came to Chadwick Books, which were on my wish lists that talk about African history and where we were at some point and why we're here now. Um, what else can I say that I don't know. I like to wear African earrings if I can find them. My hair, I've tried to more recently gone natural with my hair and just let it be, which traditionally I think was the way it was. So I'm staying away from any chemicals and stuff like that with my hair, which I don't know whether that is something about my tradition or, but it's just going natural and keeping my hair the way, it originally or naturally is.
Hmm.
Is
Um,
that good? I'm
yeah.
not sure. I don't know
Yes.
whether I've answered your question.
Um, how would you describe your relationship with your natural hair throughout the years?
With my, sorry,
With your natural hair, because I read in a book um called Americana, which was about this I forgot which country, but she
Chimamanda, Chimamanda Adichie. Yeah.
And I was curious if you had any similar stories or instances that you related to regarding your natural hair.
So the hair issue, I think for me, I mean, again, because of of the Western influence, a lot of us will straighten our hair. Our hair is naturally curly. But I did that myself also. We've used a lot of chemicals to just straighten it and keep it straight because we think that's the cool thing. And so what happens with time is that you damage your hair. And by the time you get to my age, a lot of people, my friends, people who I went to school with, their hair is just falling off. So some years back, I decided, and then it's just a lot of work. It's expensive also. So when I started working in other countries, I realized one of my biggest challenges, like here in Korea, I can't get anybody to cut my hair who understands my hair and cuts it the way I want it cut. So, but if I have my natural hair, then it's easier to manage because then I understand it and I know what to do. So I decided to go natural and keep it short if possible, and just don't use any chemicals on it at all, including dye. So at some point I dyed my hair. When the gray started coming out, I dyed it. And about 3 years ago I decided, you know what, I'm not going to dye it. I'll just keep it natural, just the way it is.
Thank you for sharing that story with us. Regarding hair and other beauty standards, how would you describe the beauty standards in Kenya and Kenyan society? And would you say that they are influenced by any culture or influence?
Influenced again by the West. So for the longest time, ladies would try and lighten their skin because they think being dark is not beautiful, and so they would use certain cosmetics to try and lighten their skins, make it lighter. So beauty is a big industry in Kenya, not as big as Korea. Korea, that's one of the things that I found interesting coming in. But beauty is a big thing, and women spend a lot of money on beauty, their hair, their skin, um, how they look, and I think a lot of it is influenced by again the Western culture. It's not how we were, originally, but then I guess being I don't want to use the word. I want to find a word that explains it. I guess just the education influences how we look at things. Exposure to other cultures and other people influences how we look at things. When I was in China, I had a lot of friends who even people from the Western world who came and had surgery to change their eyes so that their eyes are tilted. The Chinese were having surgery to have their eyes opened up, and I thought that is so funny how each time you think that you're not beautiful with what you have naturally, and you look for ways of changing it. So a lot of our women are doing that all the time. We do all kinds of things to look slightly different because we think we're more acceptable if we look that way.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Um, this is kind of related to beauty standards, but how were gender roles perceived or experienced in your childhood or your lifetime? Did they impact your education, career choices, or opportunities?
Big time, yeah. Um, so when I was growing up, things might have changed a bit more now, but when I was growing up, women, you're the homemaker. My mom was a homemaker. She worked, but technically the expectation is that she's a homemaker. She gets the babies, takes care of the babies, and the man is the breadwinner. And so what that did is, in terms of careers, is there were certain careers that were supposedly designated only for women. I wanted to do, like, example, I wanted to do design. And I came from a family of artists. My dad was an artist. He used to draw and have little exhibitions of his art. But when I said I wanted to do design, first, that was not considered a career for a lady. And according to my father, his definition of what I should have done in a career as a career was be a teacher or a nurse, something along those lines. So that influenced a lot what I ended up being, because I took a gap year off in protest, because I was like, I want to do design, I should be allowed to do design. And a year down the line, I realized it was a losing battle for me. So I went back to school, and the library, I actually tried to get into teaching, like be a teacher. And when I went back to my university, that particular path was closed. So I ended up, my next best choice was, I liked reading, and being a librarian was, to me, I thought was a good choice. So I went down that path. Um, it's still a big thing if you have girls who are engineers in Kenya or in Africa. You're considered to be really amazing. It's not one of those things that is an expectation. And so, in terms of gender, there are certain careers that people think you should, a certain path that you should go down if you're a lady, as opposed to the boys. The boys are expected to be the engineers, the doctors, and stuff like that, and then the girls will be the nurses and teachers and careers like that.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Did you have any dreams or aspirations for your future while you were growing up? And how have those dreams evolved over time?
So, I don't know. That my design dream is still a dream even today.
Yes.
I I really, my dream really was to be an interior designer, and I was really keen on developing that. And at some point in my career, when my kids grew up, and I was thinking maybe I should go back to school and do interior design. Unfortunately, I never did, but I still have a lot of interest in design. I appreciate, like, I plan here to just go around and see. I actually went to Seoul at some when we had the Chuseok holiday, and I wanted to see some of the buildings, the cathedrals, and things like that. Those kind of things fascinate me, and it's more the design that I just want to see and stuff like that. So it's a dream, but I'm not so sure I'm going to fulfill it the way I'm going.
I hope you can fulfill those dreams soon.
Like, yeah, yeah. Maybe in my children's, I like, like I like going to people's houses, and in my where I live now, I like giving people advice about how they can design their houses, and maybe you should put this kind of seat here and things. But that's as far as my dream has gone. Mm.
Mm, Moving on to a different topic, who is the earliest ancestor that you know about, and when and where did they live?
I think my granddad. Let me switch on the light here.
Mhm.
Better, I think. I think my granddad, my dad's dad, might have been the earliest, if you want to call him ancestor, that I know. And that's one of the things I'm doing now. I'm working with one of my cousins to build a family tree, because my family was huge, and my granddad had four wives.
Mhm.
And so from the four wives, you can imagine each wife had maybe 8 kids and stuff like that. So I come from a very, very big family.
Mhm.
And we've kind of lost touch with certain people. there are certain people who I don't know anything about, but when you talk to certain, a certain line in the tree, they're like, this was my dad. So we are trying to put together a family tree to just see, where we came from. But my granddad is the earliest ancestor that I remember who had a huge influence on me and a lot of my other siblings and cousins. He was an amazing man with a lot of very powerful, very powerful man.
Related to what you said about building a family tree, um, what do you think is the importance of preserving genealogy or heritage?
I think it's so important because again in Africa, and I don't know what, maybe that doesn't happen often in other countries, but in Africa, like during my dad's time, the ladies, their job, like we were talking about, the ladies, their job was just to be the homemakers, and so they would get babies. They had many children. So my granddad's wives, one of them had I think 12 children. Another had five. My dad's mom only had two kids, my dad and his sister, and then she passed on. But what has happened is that maybe not in my family, but in other families that were similar, is that kids that come from the same line have gone and met and didn't realize they were related and met and gotten married, and then later on you have issues and parents are saying, how did this happen? But if you're not able to trace your lineage and how where you came from, that is bound to happen. So I think it's important, but I also think it's important in terms of just history, knowing where you came from. So like when I was talking about the Egypt thing, I'd be very interested to know whether there was somebody in my family somewhere out there who came down from Egypt. But then when I talk to anybody, nobody knows anything about that, and it's because we have not preserved our history. We lost it somewhere along the way. Also, the Western influence has meant that there weren't a lot of history books that were written about Africa. So in school, I knew more about London and England and Western countries up there, their geography, their history, than I knew about the history of my country because that was never taught in school. And so what that has meant is that we lost our history and we don't know what our origins are or how we came to be what we are. So for me, I mean, from my interest in history, that is something one of the little things I'm doing, little projects, just trying to put my family tree together.
Mm, that's very interesting because one of my main inspirations for this project was seeing this online database from Korea
Mm,
that was like so in Korea there are different surnames like Kims and Jungs, but within like let's say Kim
mm,
is like different types of Kims based on like the clan that a person belonged to in the
right.
past. But then let's say there's like a specific clan. Um, for me, I found this website that had like the entire um like family tree of or
Mhm.
database for my last name. And I was very interested because I was thinking, oh, migrant women in Korea, like the marriage migrants, wouldn't have something
Yeah,
like that if they wanted to
yeah,
find something like that, and like multicultural children. So I was thinking, oh, I wanted to create like a cultural archive um to serve in somewhat of a similar way, um,
yeah.
like preserving the past or like stories of individuals. So that's very
Exactly, yeah. And the stories are amazing. So my granddad, he told some very amazing stories. And one of my uncles who passed on not so long ago would kind of retell those stories to us. And so this cousin I'm working with to create the family tree, he knows so much because he's the son of this uncle. And his dad would talk about, who was married to who got with children, blah blah blah. And so we are slowly trying together to put this family tree. But the stories that come with that are just amazing. It's just amazing because, and I was laughing the other day when I was chatting with him. He talked about um, one of his uncles just kidnapping a girl in the neighborhood and marrying her by force. And I was like, my God, all kinds of, things happen out there that you don't know, and you don't know how you came to be. So that's what I'm, so like you, I'm really interested in what stories come with these people.
Thank you. Um, Finally, this is the last question that we have prepared for this interview. So, if you could describe your cultural identity in 3 words, what would these 3 words be?
Oh my God, I think black. Proudly African. I think African. Let's use the word African. African. Proud to be African. And so African, proud. I don't know. Um, I did think. I didn't think about that question. I should have thought about it. Mm, just, I think intrigued
Hmm.
would be a word. I'm very intrigued by just my culture and traditions.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all of your responses today. Is there anything else you would like to add or any specific stories you would like to share before we finish?
No, I guess we could go on and on if we started telling the stories. But yeah, this has been interesting. It's made me think of a lot of things also in
Mhm.
this conversation. Yeah, but thank you for asking to interview me.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
so thank you, Miss Faith, for your participation in this oral history interview. Your stories will be preserved for future generations, which will contribute to a better understanding of migration and diversity within Korea and within Chadwick. We greatly appreciate your insights and the opportunity to document your unique perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.